好，讀你聽2.0，今日繼續讀 Miguel de Cervantes 嘅 Don Quixote， 讀到 Part 2嘅 Chapter 3。呢一節嘅名叫做 Of the lovable conversation that passed between Don Quixote, Sancho Panza and the bachelor Samson Carrasco。咁上一回咧就講 Sancho 咧就話，村入面咧就嚟咗呢個人，呢個 bachelor 叫做 Samson Carrasco。咁佢咧話俾我哋聽，喺村外面喺城入面咧就好多人都討論緊你啊，主人討論緊 Don Quixote， 討論緊佢嘅事蹟，唔單止係 Don Quixote， 連帶佢自己 Sancho Panza 同埋 Don Quixote 嘅情人啦，所謂 Dulcinea del Toboso 啦，都俾人廣為人知，有名有姓嘅。Don Quixote 聽到咧就不禁大喜過望啦，就請阿 Sancho 咧邀請 Carrasco 入嚟，分享下點解外界會對於佢哋嘅事蹟咁了如指掌咧？究竟係邊個喺度散佈呢啲消息咧？點解咧？咁故事嘅發展嚟呢度啦。
Don Quixote remained very deep in thought, waiting for the bachelor Carrasco, from whom he was to hear how he himself had been put into a book, as Sancho said, and he could not persuade himself that any such history could be in existence, for the blood of the enemies he had slain was not yet dry on the blade of his sword, and now they wanted to make out that his mighty achievements were going about in print. For all that, he fancied some sage, either a friend or an enemy, might, by the aid of magic, have given them to the press, if a friend, in order to magnify and exalt them above the most famous ever achieved by any knight-errant, if an enemy, to bring them to naught and degrade them below the meanest ever recorded of any low squire, though, as he said to himself, the achievements of squires never were recorded. If, however, it were the fact that such a history were in existence, it must necessarily, being the story of a knight-errant, be grandiloquent, lofty, imposing, grand, and true. With this he comforted himself somewhat, though it made him uncomfortable to think that the author was a Moor, judging by the title of Thede, and that no truth was to be looked for from Moors, as they are all impostors, cheats, and schemers. He was afraid he might have dealt with his love affairs in some indecorous fashion that might tend to the discredit and prejudice of the purity of his lady Dulcinea del Toboso. He would have had him set forth the fidelity and respect he had always observed towards her, spurning queens, empresses, and damsels of all sorts, and keeping in check the impetuosity of his natural impulses. Absorbed and wrapped up in these and divers other cogitations, he was found by Sancho and Carrasco, whom Don Quixote received with great courtesy. The bachelor, though he was called Samson, was of no great bodily size, but he was a very great wag. He was of a sallow complexion, but very sharp-witted, somewhere about 24 years of age, with a round face, flat nose, and a large mouth, all indications of a mischievous disposition and a love of fun and jokes. And of this he gave a sample as soon as he saw Don Quixote, by falling on his knees before him and saying, "Let me kiss your mightiness hand, Señor Don Quixote of La Mancha, for, by the habit of St. Peter that I swear, though I have no more than the first 4 orders, your worship is one of the most famous knights-errant that have ever been, or will be, all the world over. A blessing on Thede Hamate Benengeli, who has written the history of your great deeds, and a double blessing on that connoisseur who took the trouble of having it translated out of the Arabic into our Castilian vulgar tongue for the universal entertainment of the people." Don Quixote made him rise and said, "So then, it is true that there is a history of me, and that it was a Moor and a sage who wrote it." "So true is it, Signor," said Samson, "that my belief is there are more than 12,000 volumes of the said history in print this very day. Only ask Portugal, Barcelona, and Valencia, where they have been printed. And moreover, there is a report that it is being printed at Antwerp, and I am persuaded there will not be a country or language in which there will not be a translation of it." One of the things, here observed Don Quixote, that ought to give most pleasure to a virtuous and eminent man is to find himself in his lifetime in print and in type, familiar in people's mouths with a good name. I say with a good name, for if it be the opposite, then there is no death to be compared to it. "If it goes by good name and fame," said the bachelor, "your worship alone bears away the palm from all the knights-errant, for the Moor in his own language, and the Christian in his, have taken care to set before us your gallantry, your high courage in encountering dangers, your fortitude in adversity, your patience under misfortunes as well as wounds, the purity and continence of the platonic loves of your worship and my lady Dona Dulcinea del Toboso. I never heard my lady Dulcinea called Dona, observed Sancho here. Nothing more than the lady Dulcinea del Toboso, so here already the history is wrong. That is not an objection of any importance, replied Carrasco. Certainly not, said Don Quixote. But tell me, Señor Bachelor, what deeds of mine are they that are made most of in this history? On that point, replied the bachelor, opinions differ, as tastes do. Some swear by the adventure of the windmills that your worship took to be briar-rooses and giants, others by that of the fulling mills. One cries up the description of the two armies that afterwards took the appearance of two droves of sheep, another that of the dead body on its way to be buried at Segovia. A third says the liberation of the galley slaves is the best of all, and a fourth that nothing comes up to the affair with the Benedictine giants and the battle with the valiant Biscayan. Tell me, Señor Bachelor, said Sancho at this point, does the adventure with Yangusins come in when our good Rocinante went hankering after dainties? The sage has left nothing in the ink bottle, replied Samson. He tells all and sets down everything, even to the capers that worthy Sancho cut in the blanket. I cut no capers in the blanket, returned Sancho. In the air I did, and more of them than I liked. There is no human history in the world, I suppose, said Don Quixote, that has not its ups and downs, but more than others such as deal with chivalry, as they can never be entirely made up of prosperous adventures. For all that, replied the bachelor, there are those who have read the history who say they would have been glad if the author had left out some of the countless cudgellings that were inflicted on Señor Don Quixote in various encounters. That's where the truth of the history comes in, said Sancho. At the same time, they might fairly have passed them over in silence, observed Don Quixote, for there is no need of recalling events which do not change or affect the truth of history, if they tend to bring the hero of it into contempt. Aeneas was not in truth and earnest so pious as Virgil represents him, nor Ulysses so wise as Homer describes him. That is true, said Samson, but it is one thing to write as a poet, another to write as a historian. The poet may describe or sing things, not as they were, but as they ought to have been. But the historian has to write them down, not as they ought to have been, but as they were, without adding anything to the truth or taking anything from it. Well then, said Sancho, if this Señor Moore goes in for telling the truth, no doubt among my master's drubbings mine are to be found. For they never took the measure of his worship's shoulders, without doing the same for my whole body. But I have no right to wonder at that, for, as my master himself says, the members must share the pain of the head. You are a sly dog, Sancho, said Don Quixote. Ay, faith, you have no want of memory when you choose to remember. If I were to try to forget the thwacks they gave me, said Sancho, my wheels would not let me, for they are still fresh on my ribs. Hush, Sancho, said Don Quixote, and don't interrupt the bachelor, whom I entreat to go on and tell all that is said about me in this history. And about me, said Sancho, for they say too that I am one of the principal personages in it. Personages, not presonages, friend Sancho, said Samson. What, another word catcher, said Sancho. If that's to be the way, we shall not make an end in a lifetime. May God shorten mine, Sancho, returned the bachelor, if you are not the second person in the history, and there are even some who would rather hear you talk than the cleverest in the whole book, though there are some, too, who say you show yourself over-credulous in believing there was any possibility in the government of that island offered you by Señor Don Quixote. There is still sunshine on the wall, said Don Quixote, and when Sancho is somewhat more advanced in life, with the experience that years bring, he will be fitter and better qualified for being a governor than he is at present. By God, master, said Sancho, the island that I cannot govern with the years I have, I will not be able to govern with the years of Methuselah. The difficulty is that the said island keeps its distance somewhere, I know not where, and not that there is any want of head in me to govern it. Leave it to God, Sancho, said Don Quixote, for all will be, and perhaps better than you think. No leaf on the tree stirs but God's will. That is true, said Samson, and if it be God's will, there will not be any want of 1,000 islands, much less one, for Sancho to govern. I have seen governors in these parts, said Sancho, that are not to be compared to my shoe sole, and for all that they are called your lordship and serve on silver. Those are not governors on islands, observed Samson, but of other governments of an easier kind. Those that govern islands must at least know grammar. I could manage the gram well enough, said Sancho, but for the ma I have neither leaning nor liking, for I don't know what it is. But leaving this matter of the government in God's hands, to send me wherever it may be most to his service, I may tell you, Senor Bachelor Samson Carrasco, it has pleased me beyond measure that the author of this history should have spoken of me in such a way that what is said of me gives no offence. For, on the faith of a true squire, if he had said anything about me that was at all unbecoming an old Christian, such as I am, the deaf would have heard of it. That would be working miracles, said Samson. Miracles or no miracles, said Sancho. Let everyone mind how he speaks or writes about people, and not set down at random the first thing that comes into his head. One of the faults they find with this history, said Bachelor, is that its author inserted in it a novel called The Ill-Advised Curiosity. Not that it is bad or ill-told, but that it is out of place and has nothing to do with the history of his worship Senor Don Quixote. I will bet the son of a dog has mixed the cabbages in the baskets, said Sancho. Then I say, said Don Quixote, the author of my history was no sage, but some ignorant chatterer, who in a haphazard and heedless way set about writing it, let it turn out as it might, just as Ormsby, the painter of Ubeda, used to do, who, when they asked him what he was painting, answered, what it may turn out. Sometimes he would paint a cock in such a fashion, and so unlike, that he had to write alongside of it in Gothic letters, this is a cock. And so it will be with my history, which will require a commentary to make it intelligible. No fear of that, returned Samson, for it is so plain that there is nothing in it to puzzle over. The children turn its leaves, the young people read it, the grown men understand it, the old folk praise it. In a word, it is so thumbed and read and got by heart by people of all sorts, that the instant they see any lean hack, they say, there goes Rocinante. And those that are most given to reading it are the pages, for there is not a Lord's antechamber where there is not a Don Quixote to be found. One takes it up if another lays it down. This one pounces upon it, and that begs for it. In short, the sad history is the most delightful and least injurious entertainment that has been hitherto seen, for there is not to be found in the whole of it even the semblance of an immortal word, or a thought that is other than Catholic. To write in any other way, said Don Quixote, would not be to write truth, but falsehood, and historians who have recourse to falsehood ought to be burned, like those who coin false money. And I know not what could have led the author to have recourse to novels and irrelevant stories, when he had so much to write about in mind. No doubt he must have gone by the proverb, with straw or with hay, for by merely setting forth my thoughts, my sighs, my tears, my lofty purposes, my enterprises, he might have made a volume as large, or larger than all the works of El Tostado would make up. In fact, the conclusion I arrive at, Senor Bachelor, is that to write histories, or books of any kind, there is need of great judgment and a ripe understanding. To give expression to humour, to write in a strain of graceful pleasantry, is the gift of great geniuses. The cleverest character in comedy is the clown, for he who would make people take him for a fool must not be one. History is in measure a sacred thing, for it should be true, and where the truth is, there God is. But notwithstanding this, there are some who write and fling books broadcast on the world as if they were fritters. There is no book so bad but it has something good in it, said the bachelor. No doubt of that, replied Don Quixote. But it often happens that those who have acquired and attained a well-deserved reputation by their writings lose it entirely or damage it in some degree when they give them to the press. The reason of that, said Samson, is that as printed works are examined leisurely, their faults are easily seen, and the greater the fame of the writer, the more closely are they scrutinized. Men famous for their genius, great poets, illustrious historians are always, or most commonly, envied by those who take a particular delight and pleasure in criticizing the writings of others, without having produced any of their own. That is no wonder, said Don Quixote, for there are many divines who are no good for the pulpit, but excellent in detecting the defects or excesses of those who preach. All that is true, Senor Don Quixote, said Carrasco, but I wish such fault-finders were more lenient and less exacting, and did not pay so much attention to the spots on the bright sun of the work they grumble at. For if sometimes even the good Homer nods off, they should remember how long he remained awake to shed the light of his work with as little shade as possible. And perhaps it may be that what they find fault with may be moles, that sometimes heighten the beauty of the face that bears them, And so I say very great is the risk to which he who prints a book exposes himself, for of all impossibilities, the greatest is to write one that will satisfy and please all readers. That which treats of me must have pleased few, said Don Quixote. Quite the contrary, said the bachelor, for the number of fools is infinite. Innumerable are those who have relished the sad history, but some have brought a charge against the author's memory, inasmuch as he forgot to say who the thief was who stole Sancho's staple, for it is not stated there, but only to be inferred from what is set down, that he was stolen. And a little farther on we see Sancho mounted on the same ass, without any reappearance of it. They say too, that he forgot to state that Sancho did with those 100 crowns that he found in the valleys in the Sierra Morena, as he never alludes to them again. And there are many who would be glad to know what he did with them, or what he spent them on, for it is one of the serious omissions of the work. Signor Samson, I am not in humour now for going into accounts of explanations, said Sancho, for there's a sinking of the stomach come over me, and unless I doctor it with a couple of sups of the oat stuff, it will put me on the thorn of Santa Lucia. I have it at home, and my old woman is waiting for me. After dinner I'll come back, and will answer you and all the world every question you may choose to ask, as well about the loss of the ass as about the spending of the 100 crowns. And without another word, or waiting for a reply, he made off home. Don Quixote begged and entreated the bachelor to stay and do penance with him. The bachelor accepted the invitation and remained. A couple of young pigeons were added to the ordinary fare. At dinner they talked chivalry, Carrasco fell in with his host's humour, the banquet came to an end. They took the afternoon sleep, Sancho returned, and their conversation was resumed.
好啦，咁呢節咧就主要嘅內容都係 Carrasco 話俾 Don Quixote 聽，原來咧佢嘅事蹟咧已經結集成書，喺好多大城都有刊登噶啦，咁好多人都有睇，實在太多人睇啦。咁但係佢哋記載嘅故事咧，好多都係或者 Don Quixote 認為係滑稽噶啦。咁佢甚至乎咧，將啲故事咧，將呢啲咁嘅歷史、呢啲經歷咧，叫做 the tale of inappropriate curiosity， 即係啲唔恰當嘅好奇。咁咧，當 Quixote 咧就覺得有啲唔恰當。咁於是乎咧，佢哋就討論咗乜嘢為之傳記啦，咩為之詩歌啦，乜嘢值得記載，乜嘢唔值得記載啦。咁佢話，既然呢一本書係某程度上係一個傳記咧，咁所有經歷咧都要記落嚟嘅。Carrasco 有提到好多讀者咧都有關於好細眉細眼嘅嘢，一啲細節咧好執着，譬如有關於 Sancho 嘅女仔啦，佢嘅座駕啦，點解會唔見咗又翻嚟啦？又或者Sancho 執咗啲金幣，去到個位執到啲錢，咁佢點樣用咧？本書冇交代到喎，咁有好多人咧都喺度質問呢樣嘢。對於呢樣嘢咧，阿 Sancho 嘅反應就係：哇，你呢啲問題，唉，我真係覺得好辛苦。梗係咁啦，你俾我行開一陣啦，我轉頭翻嚟啦。咁於是乎咧，佢哋就繼續佢哋嘅暢談，整體嚟講係好正面嘅、歡暢嘅。咁然之後咧就稍作休息啦。咁之後咧，佢哋又繼續嘅交談。咁其實目前為止咧，呢個歷險咧係未開始嘅，但係喺思想上面、喺思辨上面咧，就繼續係中環前程。佢哋借呢個 Carrasco 嘅呢樣嘢，其實係借佢把口去講真正嘅呢本書嘅讀者，佢睇完 part 1之後，佢哋嘅反應。呢一節其實係討論讀者睇完第一 part 嘅讀者佢哋嘅反應，而作者就透過 Don Quixote 同埋 Sancho 去回應，同埋去做一個思辨。對於讀者嘅一啲反應咧，有啲係會令佢始料不及嘅。咁但係整體咧係一個開心嘅時間，因為本書講到尾都係賣，都係好賣得。咁我覺得作者喺呢方面都係好 graceful， 好高興嘅。好，我哋睇下啲咩字同大家分享。Grandiloquent， Grandiloquent， Grandiloquent， 形容詞嚟嘅。Pompous or extravagant in language, style or manner, especially in a way that is intended to impress。賣弄詞組嘅，言辭浮誇嘅，呢個字我自己比較少見。喺言辭上面好賣弄嘅。Indecorous， Indecorous， 形容詞嚟嘅。Not in keeping with good taste and propriety， improper， 一啲恰當嘅。 粗鄙嘅。connoisseur 呢個係法文字嘅 connoisseur 呢個字比較常用，名詞嚟嘅。An expert judge in matters of taste， 鑑賞家啦，我哋中文會叫做鑑定。好，我哋呢一節嚟到呢度，下一次再同大家讀你聽，拜拜。大家好，讀你聽2.0，今日我哋繼續讀 Miguel de Cervantes 嘅 Don Quixote， 讀到第4節啦。呢一節嘅名叫做 In which Sancho Panza gives a satisfactory reply to the doubts and questions of the bachelor Samson Carrasco, together with other matters worth knowing and telling。 咁上一回咧就承接住，咁 Carrasco 咧就留喺 Don Quixote 嘅身邊啦，就同佢講翻呢啲書，有關佢事蹟嘅書所引起嘅公眾嘅反應啦，因為呢啲書就已經係刊登咗喺好多嘅城市、唔同嘅國家、唔同嘅文化嘅人、唔同國籍嘅人、唔同階層嘅人、唔同身份嘅人咧，對呢本書咧有唔同嘅反應。但係整體嚟講咧，當然係熱議嘅。咁對於Don Quixote嚟講，都係一個鼓舞嘅作用啦。Carrasco 就仲有提到好多關於一啲好瑣碎嘅。有啲讀者會針對一啲好繁瑣嘅嘢，譬如邊個偷咗 Sancho 隻驢仔啊，幾時還翻俾佢啊，Sancho 執嗰啲錢點用啊，呢啲好細節嘅咧，又要好執着咁去發問。作者透過Don Quixote同埋 Sancho 嘅反應咧，就知道佢嘅態度係點樣。等我哋睇下呢一節會唔會繼續講讀者咧，定係這會對Don Quixote有精神嘅啲睇法咧？我哋睇下啦。
Sancho came back to Don Quixote's house, and returning to the late subject of conversation, he said, as to what Señor Samson said, that he would like to know by whom or how, or when my ass was stolen, I say in reply that the same night we went to the Sierra Morena, flying from the Holy Brotherhood after that unlucky adventure of the galley slaves, and the other of the corpse that was going to Segovia, my master and I ensconced ourselves in a thicket, and there my master leaning on his lance, and I seated on my dapple, battered and weary with the late phrase without sleep as if it had been on 4 feather mattresses, and I in particular slept so sound that whoever he was able to come and prop me up on 4 stakes, which he put under the 4 corners of the pack saddle in such a way that he left me mounted on it, and took away dapple from under me without my feeling it. That is an easy matter, said Don Quixote, and it is no new occurrence, for the same thing happened to Sacripante at the siege of Albraca. The famous thief, Brunello, by the same contrivance, took his horse from between his legs. They came, continued Sancho, and the moment I stirred, the stakes gave way, and I fell to the ground with a mighty come down. I looked about for the ass, but could not see him. The tears rushed to my eyes, and I raised such a lamentation that, if the author of our history has not put it in, he may depend upon it, he has left out a good thing. Some days later, I know not how many, travelling with her ladyship, the Princess Micomicona, I saw my ass, and mounted upon him, in the dress of a gypsy, was that Guinness de Pasamonte, the great rogue and rascal that my master and I freed from the chain. That is not where the mistake is, replied Samson. It is that before the ass has turned up, the author speaks of Sancho as being mounted on it. I don't know what to say to that, said Sancho, unless that the historian made a mistake, or perhaps it might be a blunder of the printers. No doubt that's it, said Samson. But what became of the 100 crowns? Did they vanish? To which Sancho answered, I spent them for my own good, and my wife's and my children's, and it is they that have made my wife bear so patiently all my wanderings on highways and byways, in the service of my master, Don Quixote. For if after all this time I had come back to the house without a rap and without the ass, it would have been a poor lookout for me. And if anyone wants to know anything more about me, here I am, ready to answer the king himself in person. And it is no affair of anyone's whether I took or did not take, whether I spent or did not spend, for the whacks that were given me in these journeys were to be paid for in money, even if they were valued at no more than 4 maravedis apiece. Another 100 crowns would not pay me for half of them. Let each look to himself and not try to make out white black and black white, for each of us is as God made him, aye, and often worse. I will take care, said Carrasco, to impress upon the author of the history that if he prints it again, he must not forget what worthy Sancho has said, for it will raise it a good span higher. Is there anything else to correct in the history, Señor Bachelor? Asked Don Quixote. No doubt there is, replied he, but not anything that will be of the same importance as those I have mentioned. Does the author promise a second part at all? Said Don Quixote. He does promise one, replied Samson, but he says he has not found it, nor does he know who has got it, and we cannot say whether it will appear or not. And so, on that head, as some say that no second part has ever been good, the others that enough has been already written about Don Quixote, it is thought there will be no second part, though some, who are jovial rather than saturnine, say, let us have more Quixotades. Let Don Quixote charge and Sancho chatter, and no matter what it may turn out, we shall be satisfied with that. And what does the author mean to do? Said Don Quixote. What? Replied Samson. Why, as soon as he has found a history which he is now searching for with extraordinary diligence, he will at once give it to the press, moved more by the profit that may accrue to him from doing so than by any thought of praise. Whereat Sancho observed, the author looks for money and profit, does he? It will be a wonder if he succeeds, for it will be only hurry with him, like the tailor on Easter Eve, and works done in a hurry are never finished as perfectly as they ought to be. Let Master Moore, or whatever he is, pay attention to what he is doing, and I and my master will give him as much grouting ready to his hand, in the way of adventures and accidents of all sorts, as would make up not only one second part, but 100. The good man fancies, no doubt, that we are fast asleep in the straw here, but let him hold out our feet to be shot, and he will see which foot it is we go lame on. All I say is that if my master would take my advice, we would be now afield, redressing outrages and righting wrongs, as is the use and custom of good knights errant. Sancho had hardly uttered these words when the neighing of Rocinante fell upon their ears, which neighing Don Quixote accepted as a happy omen, and he resolved to make another sally in 3 or 4 days from that time. Announcing his attention to the bachelor, he asked his advice as to the quarter in which he ought to commence his expedition, and the bachelor replied that in his opinion he ought to go to the kingdom of Aragon and the city of Saragossa, where there were to be certain solemn joustings and a festival of St. George, at which he might win renown above all the knights of Aragon, which would be winning it above all the knights of the world. He commended his very praiseworthy and gallant resolution, but admonished him to proceed with greater caution in encountering dangers, because his life did not belong to him, but to all those who had need of him to protect and aid them in their misfortunes. There's where it is. What I abominate, Señor Samson, said Sancho here. My master will attack 100 armed men as a greedy boy would half a dozen melons. Body of the world, Señor Bachelor, there is a time to attack and a time to retreat, and it is not to be always Santiago and close Spain. Moreover, I have heard it said that the mean of valor lies between the extremes of cowardice and rashness, and if that be so, I don't want him to fly without having good reason, or to attack when the odds make it better not. But above all things, I warn my master that if he is to take me with him, it must be on the condition that he is to do all the fighting, and that I am not to be called upon to do anything except what concerns keeping him clean and comfortable. In this I will dance attendance on him readily. But to expect me to draw sword, even against rascally churls of the hatchet and hood, is idle. I don't set up to be a fighting man, Señor Samson, but only the best and most loyal squire that ever served knight-errant. And if my master Don Quixote, in consideration of my many faithful services, is pleased to give me some island of the many his worship says one may stumble on in these parts, I will take it as a great favour. And if he does not give it to me, I was born like everyone else, and a man must not live in dependence on anyone except God. And what is more, my bread would taste as well, and perhaps even better, without a government than if I were a governor. And how do I know but that in these governments the devil may have prepared some trick for me, to make me lose my footing and fall and knock my grinders out? Sancho I was born, and Sancho I mean to die. But for all that, if heaven were to make me a fair offer of an island or something else of the kind, without much trouble and without much risk, I am not such a fool as to refuse it. For they say too, when they offer thee a heifer, run with a halter, and when good luck comes to thee, take it in. Brother Sancho, said Carrasco, you have spoken like a professor, but for all that, put your trust in God and in Señor Don Quixote, for he will give you a kingdom, not to say an island. It is all the same, be it more or be it less, replied Sancho. Though I can tell Senor Carrasco that my master would not throw the kingdom he might give me into a sack or in holes, for I have felt my own pulse, and I find myself sound enough to rule kingdoms and govern islands, and I have before now told my master as much. Take care, Sancho, said Samson. Honors change manners, and perhaps when you find yourself a governor, you won't know the mother that bore you. That may hold good of those that are born in the ditches, said Sancho, not of those who have the fat of an old Christian 4 fingers deep on their souls, as I have. Nay, only look at my disposition. Is that likely to show ingratitude to anyone? God grant it, said Don Quixote. We shall see when the government comes, and I seem to see it already. He then begged the bachelor, if he were a poet, to do him the favour of composing some verses for him conveying the farewell he meant to take of his lady Dulcinea del Toboso, and to see that the letter of her name was placed in the beginning of each line, so that at the end of the verses, Dulcinea del Toboso might be read by putting together the first letters. The bachelor replied that although he was not one of the famous poets of Spain, who were, they said, only 3½, he would not fail to compose the required verses, though he saw a great difficulty in the task, as the letters which made up the name were 17. So, if he made 4 ballad stanzas of 4 lines each, there would be a letter over, and if he made them of 5, what they call decimers or redondeas, there were 3 letters short. Nonetheless, he would try to drop the letter as well as he could, so that the name Dulcinea del Toboso might be got into 4 ballad stanzas. It must be by some means or another, said Don Quixote, for unless the name stands there plain and manifest, no woman would believe the verses were made for her. They agreed upon this, and that the departure should take place in 3 days from that time. Don Quixote charged the bachelor to keep it a secret, especially from the curate and Master Nicholas, and from his niece and the housekeeper, lest they should prevent the execution of his praiseworthy and valiant purpose. Carrasco promised all, and then took his leave, charging Don Quixote to inform him of his good or evil fortunes whenever he had an opportunity, and thus they bade each other farewell, and Sancho went away to make the necessary preparation for the expedition.
好，呢一節讀到係呢一度，咁呢一節就好簡單啫，繼續補完翻作者透過Sancho把口啦，啲女仔點樣嚟㗎，點樣去㗎，啲錢點樣使㗎，咁作者嘗試去做一個解話，解完出嚟 Carrasco 嘅反應係，咁但係你又唔見咗啊？點解你又好似騎住啊？即係啲 continuation 呢啲連戲上嘅嘢嘅問題啊，嗰啲細節上嘅問題啊 ，Sancho 即係話一定係你 historian 寫錯咯，即係某程度上係一種自責啦，就係寫錯咯咁或者咁啲錢咪就係使咗喺邊度咯，冇咩好值得講啫。咁但係佢都嘗試去同嗰個讀者大眾啊做一個溝通啊。咁然之後最後表現出Don Quixote咧係想重新去上路嘅，呢個好緊要。咁而 Carrasco 嘅回應咧當然係正面啦，因為佢作為一個讀者，佢作為一個學者，就係對於遊俠精神嘅呢啲支持者，咁佢當然想去上路，但係佢都不忘咧同Don Quixote講，你已經唔係再係你自己嘅一條命啦，你係負載住你所有嘅支持者，你嘅讀者，所以你一定要鏡石啲，珍惜你自己嘅生命。咁但係Don Quixote同埋 Sancho 當然唔會因為呢啲嘢去影響到佢哋嘅俠義精神啦，咁講啦。最後咧 Carrasco 咧都要離開啦，Don Quixote就懇請佢為佢嘅情人Dulcinea del Toboso啦就寫一個詩歌，呢個詩歌咧係西班牙獨有嘅，咁佢有個獨有嘅格式。佢希望咧每一句嘅前面咧都有Dulcinea del Toboso嘅名嘅一個字母，然之後咧當你打落去讀嗰陣時候咧就可以讀到佢個名啦。唔係有難度嘅，咁但係咧 Carrasco 咧係會做嘅。咁說明咗咧作者咧係打算寫劇，不過呢刻未諗得好，遲啲先吓。最重要係咩嘢？就係Don Quixote要上路啦，佢嘅真正嘅旅程咧要開始啦。好，我哋睇下呢字有啲咩字同大家分享。Lamentation 名詞嚟嘅 Lamentation The passionate expression of grief or sorrow, weeping 悲哭啊，傷感啊。Saturnine Saturn Saturn 土星啦，Saturnine 呢個係一個形容詞嚟嘅 ，of a person or their manner， 好 gloomy 嘅，好唔開朗嘅。churl， C-H-U-R-L， 名詞嚟嘅 ，a rude and mean-spirited person，a churl。好，咁我哋呢一節讀到呢度，下一節再講讀你聽，拜拜。大家好，讀你聽2.0，今日繼續讀 Miguel de Cervantes 嘅 Don Quixote， 讀到 Part 2嘅第5節，呢一節嘅名叫做 Of the shrewd and droll conversation that passed between Sancho Panza and his wife Teresa Panza, and other matters worthy of being duly recorded。咁上一回咧就個結尾咧就終於講 Don Quixote 同 Sancho 咧要上路啦。咁出發前咧佢就同呢個學者 Carrasco 講啦，就係話保守秘密啦咁樣。咁在之前咧佢哋都再溝通一啲關於讀者嘅要求啦。其中之一個象徵式啲嘅就係讀者要求呢個遊俠力獻咧多啲 Quixote Q-U-I-X-O-T-R-Y， 意思即係咧想 Quixote 咧多啲打鬥，咁 Sancho 咧就講嘢，做翻呢個分工，就唔好兩個一齊講，或者兩個一齊打。好，我哋睇下呢一節咧，似乎都好似未真正出發喎，因為 Panza 要同佢個太太可能要傾下偈喎，咁睇下發生咩事啊
？The translator of this history, when he comes to write this 5th chapter, says that he considers it apocryphal, because in it Sancho Panza speaks in a style unlike that which might have been expected from his limited intelligence, and says things so subtle that he does not think it possible he could have conceived them. However, desirous of doing what his task imposed upon him, he was unwilling to leave it untranslated, and therefore he went on to say, Sancho came home in such glee and spirits that his wife noticed his happiness a bow shot off, so much so that it made her ask him, What have you got, Sancho friend, that you are so glad? To which he replied, Wife, if it were God's will, I should be very glad not to be so well pleased as I show myself. I don't understand you, husband, said she, and I don't know what you mean by saying you would be glad, if it were God's will, not to be well pleased, for, fool as I am, I don't know how one can find pleasure in not having it. Hark ye, Teresa, replied Sancho, I am glad because I have made up my mind to go back to the service of my master Don Quixote, who means to go out a 3rd time to seek for adventures, and I am going with him again, for my necessities will have it so, and also the hope that cheers me with the thought that I may find another 100 crowns like those we have spent, though it makes me sad to have to leave thee and the children, and if God would be pleased to let me have my daily bread, dry shod and at home, without taking me out into the byways and crossroads, and he could do it at small cost by merely willing it, it is clear my happiness would be more solid and lasting. For the happiness I have is mingled with sorrow at leaving thee, so that I was right in saying I would be glad, if it were God's will, not to be well pleased. Look here, Sancho, said Teresa. Ever since you joined on a knight-errant, you talk in such a roundabout way that there is no understanding you. It is enough that God understands me, wife, replied Sancho, for he is the understander of all things. That will do. But mind, sister, you must look to Dapple carefully for the next 3 days, so that he may be fit to take arms. Double his feed, and see to the pack saddle and other harness, for it is not to a wedding we are bound, but to go round the world, and play at give and take with giants and dragons and monsters, and hear hissings and roarings and bellowings and howlings. And even all this would be lavender, if we had not to reckon with Yanguzans and enchanted Moors. I know well enough, husband, said Teresa, that squires errant don't eat their bread for nothing, and so I will be always praying to our Lord to deliver you speedily from all that hard fortune. I can tell you, wife, said Sancho, if I did not expect to see myself governor of an island before long, I would drop down dead on the spot. Nay, then, husband, said Teresa, let the hen live, though it be with her pip, live, and let the devil take all the governments in the world. You came out of your mother's womb without a government. You have lived until now without a government. And when it is God's will you will go, or be carried, to your grave without a government. How many there are in the world who live without a government, and continue to live all the same, and are reckoned in the number of people. The best sauce in the world is hunger, and as the poor are never without that, they always eat with a relish. But mind, Sancho, if by good luck you should find yourself with some government, don't forget me and your children. Remember that Sancho is now full 15, and it is right he should go to school. If his uncle, the abbot, has a mind to have him trained for the church. Consider, too, that your daughter, Mary Sancho, will not die of grief if we marry her, for I have my suspicions that she is as eager to get a husband as you to get a governor. And after all, a daughter looks better ill-married than well-whored. By my faith, replied Sancho, if God brings me to get any sort of a government, I intend, wife, to make such a high match for Mary Sancho that there will be no approaching her without calling her my lady. Nay, Sancho, returned Teresa, marry her to her equal. That is the safest plan. For if you put her out of wooden clogs into high-heeled shoes, out of her great flannel petticoat into hoops and silk gowns, out of the plain Marica and thou into Donna so-and-so and my lady, the girl won't know where she is, and at every turn she will fall into 1,000 blunders that will show the thread of her coarse homespun stuff. Tut, you fool, said Sancho. It will be only to practice it for 2 or 3 years, and then dignity and decorum will fit her as easily as a glove. And if not, what matter? Let her be my lady, and never mind what happens. Keep to your own station, Sancho, replied Teresa. Don't try to raise yourself higher, and bear in mind the proverb that says, wipe the nose of your neighbor's son, and take him into your house. A fine thing it would be, indeed, to marry our Maria to some great count or grand gentleman, who, when a human took him, would abuse her and call her clown-bred and clock-hopper's daughter and spinning wench. I have not been bringing up my daughter for that all this time, I can tell you, husband. Do you bring home money, Sancho, and leave marrying her to my care. There is Lope Tocco, Juan Tocco's son, a stout, sturdy young fellow that we know, and I can see he does not look sour at the girl. And with him, one of our own sort, she will be well married. And we shall have her always under our eyes, and be all one family, parents and children, grandchildren and sons-in-law, and the peace and blessing of God will dwell among us. So don't you go marrying her in those courts and grand palaces where they won't know what to make of her, or she what to make of herself. Why, you idiot and wife of Barabbas, said Sancho, what do you mean by trying, without why or wherefore, to keep me from marrying my daughter to one who will give me grandchildren that will be called your lordship? Look ye, Teresa, I have always heard my elders say that he who does not know how to take advantage of luck when it comes to him has no right to complain if it gives him to go by. And now that it is knocking at our door, it will not do to shut it out. Let us go with the favouring breeze that blows upon us. It is this sort of talk, and what Sancho says lower down, that made the translator of the history say he considers this chapter apocryphal. Don't you see, you animal, continued Sancho, that it will be well for me to drop into some profitable government that will lift us out of the mire, and marry Mary Sancho to whom I like, and you yourself will find yourself called Donna Teresa Panza, and sitting in church on a fine carpet and cushions and draperies, in spite and in defiance of all the born ladies of the town? No, stay as you are, growing neither greater nor less, like a tapestry figure. Let us say no more about it, for Sanchica shall be a countess, say what you will. Are you sure of all you say, husband? Replied Teresa. Well, for all that, I'm afraid this rank of countess for my daughter will be her ruin. You do as you like, make a duchess or a princess of her, but I can tell you it will not be with my will and consent. I was always a lover of equality, brother, and I can't bear to see people give themselves heirs without any right. They called me Teresa at my baptism, a plain, simple name, without any additions or tags or fringes or dons and donnas. Cascajo was my father's name, and as I am your wife, I am called Teresa Panza, though by right I ought to be called Teresa Cascajo. But kings go where laws like, and I am content with this name without having the don put on top of it to make it so heavy that I cannot carry it. And I don't want to make people talk about me when they see me go dressed like a countess or governor's wife, for they will say at once, see what airs the slut gives herself. Only yesterday she was always spinning flax, and used to go to mass with the tail of her petticoat over her head instead of her mantle. And there she goes today in a hooped gown with her brooches and airs, as if we didn't know her. If God keeps me in my 7 senses, or 5, or whatever number I have, I am not going to bring myself to such a pass. Go, you brother, and be a government or an island man, and swagger as much as you like. For by the soul of my mother, neither my daughter nor I are going to stir a step from our village. A respectable woman should have a broken leg and keep at home, and to be busy at something is a virtuous damsel's holiday. Be off to your adventures along with your Don Quixote, and leave us to our misadventures, for God will mend them for us according as we deserve it. I don't know, I'm sure, who fixed the dawn to him, what neither his father nor grandfather ever had. I declare thou hast a devil of some sort in thy body, said Sancho. God help thee, what a lot of things thou hast strung together, one after the other, without head or tail. What have cascajo, and the brooches and proverbs and the airs, to do with what I say? Look here, fool and dolt. If I had said that my daughter was to throw herself down from a tower, or go roaming the world, as the inventor Donna Urraca wanted to do, you would be right in not giving way to my will. But if in an instant, in less than the twinkling of an eye, I put the Don and my lady on her back, and take her out of the stubble, and place her under a canopy on a dais on a couch, with more velvet cushions than all the Almohades of Morocco ever had in their family, why don't you consent and fall in with my wishes? Do you know why, husband? Replied Teresa. Because of the proverb that says, who covers thee, discovers thee. And the poor man people only throw a hasty glance. On the rich man they fix their eyes. And if the said rich man was once on a time poor, it is then there is the sneering and the tattle and spite of backbiters. And in the streets here they swarm as thick as bees. Look here, Teresa, said Sancho, and listen to what I am now going to say to you. Maybe you never heard it in all your life, and I do not give my own notions. For what I am about to say are the opinions of his reverence the preacher, who preached in this town last Lent, and who said, if I remember rightly, that all things present that our eyes behold, bring themselves before us, and remain and fix themselves on our memory much better and more forcibly than things past. These observations which Sancho makes here are the other ones, on account of which the translator says he regards this chapter as apocryphal, inasmuch as they are beyond Sancho's capacity. Whence it arises, he continued, that when we see any person well-dressed and making a figure with rich garments and retinue of servants, it seems to lead and impel us perforce to respect him, though memory may at the same moment recall to us some lowly condition in which we have seen him, but which, whether it may have been poverty or low birth, being now a thing of the past, has no existence, while the only thing that has any existence is what we see before us. And if this person whom fortune has raised from his original lowly state to his present height of prosperity be well-bred, generous, courteous to all, without seeking to vie with those whose nobility is of ancient date, depend upon it, Teresa, no one will remember what he was, and everyone will respect what he is, except indeed the envious, from whom no fair fortune is safe. I do not understand you, husband, replied Teresa. Do as you like, and don't break my head with any more speechifying and rhetoric. And if you have resolved to do what you say, resolved, you should say, woman, said Sancho, not revolved. Don't set yourself to wrangle with me, husband, said Teresa. I speak as God pleases, and don't deal in out-of-the-way phrases. And I say, if you are bent upon having a government, take your son Sancho with you, and teach him from this time on how to hold a government. For sons ought to inherit and learn the trades of their fathers. As soon as I have the government, said Sancho, I will send for him by post, and I will send thee money, of which I shall have no lack. For there is never any want of people to lend it to governors when they have not got it. And do thou dress him so as to hide what he is, and make him look what he is to be. You send the money, said Teresa, and I'll dress him up for you as fine as you please. Then we are agreed that our daughter is to be a countess, said Sancho. The day that I see her a countess, replied Teresa, it will be the same to me as if I was burying her. But once more I say do as you please, for we women are born to this burden of being obedient to our husbands, though they be dogs. And with this she began to weep in earnest, as if she already saw Sanchica dead and buried. Sancho consoled her by saying that though he must make her a countess, he would put it off as long as possible. Here their conversation came to an end, and Sancho went back to see Don Quixote and make arrangements for their departure.
好，呢個第五節讀到嚟呢一度，呢一回咧就講 Sancho 同佢太太 Teresa 嘅對話啦，好快就起咗口角噶啦。主要咧就係因為 Sancho 話俾太太聽，佢要上路啦，而上路為咗咩咧？就係為咗錢財啦，為咗財產啦，為咗名銜啦，希望咧自己可以成為執政者啦，掌控一個政府啦，自己就可以上流啦。咁啊，連帶老婆仔女都會雞犬升天啊！但係太太嘅態度咧就唔係咁諗嘅， 佢又覺得咧佢哋唔應該做咗上流之後咧就變成咗上流人，即係要飲水思源啊，做翻自己。其中一樣嘢好緊要就係個女咧千祈唔可以嫁俾貴族，佢要嫁翻俾咧佢而家已經諗好咗嘅一個普通人嘅身份啊，咁樣咧先至唔會俾其他人去嘲笑、去嘲弄，或者俾其他人係喜如佢哋上流咁樣。咁但係 Sancho 咧就一咧係拒絕嘅，就係話而家時流運到咧就唔應該同運氣咧去爭鬧，應該咧就順應天意咁樣。即係兩個人嘅爭執咧，可笑之處、滑稽之處就係佢哋已經諗住一定係會發達噶啦，一定係會做到島主、做到執政者噶啦。咁但係事實上實話都未有一撇，咁但係已經好認真、好熱情咁樣去喺度討論、喺度爭執。咁最後太太就有啲唔開心啦，直情要喊啦，因為即係唔想個女咁樣嫁出去啦。咁但係 Sancho 咧都安撫咗太太嘅。太太亦都話最好帶埋個仔去啦，你要訓練佢啊，點樣做執政者啊，點樣做 governor 啊，同埋咧 Sancho 咧又不忘咧，好似 Don Quixote 糾正佢嘅措辭錯誤一樣，佢又糾正佢太太。太太當然係唔理佢啦，鬧翻下轉頭，始終都係一個唔錯嘅結束啦。個對話即係兩位都係交咗心嘅。咁然之後最尾 Sancho 咧就要出發啦。一個出發前嘅小插曲，呢一節得一個字同大家分享 vie V-I-E vie 動詞嚟嘅 compete eagerly with someone in order to do or achieve something。 喺文中嘅尾段嗰度咧又話 vie 同我哋爭奪嘅意思。嗱，文中出現過好多次啊呢個字 apocryphal。 咁呢個字之前同大家分享過，所以今次就唔刻意講太多。呢個字意思即係話係杜撰，究竟有冇真實發現呢件事呢？定係之後人哋去杜撰呢，令到以訛傳訛，傳到好似係真呢？有一種咁嘅意味喺度。Apocryphal， 點解作者要又打破第四埲牆話 Sancho 呢個對話係好 apocryphal 呢？就係因為佢認為 Sancho 啲咁嘅對話啲思想實在係太愚昧啦，都未發生，你講到似層層，咁究竟咪真係有咁講過呢啲嘢㗎？好，我哋下一節再同大家讀你聽，拜拜。